Welcome everybody to Just Saying, Straker's new podcast. My name is Gianluca. I'm your host, and I'm really excited to introduce you guys to and have with me David McNamee. He's a senior solutions engineer at Lingotek. To give everybody a little bit of context, if they don't know, Lingotek or Straker Lingotek was acquired by Straker a little over a year ago. And David is just one of those incredibly smart people that every time we talk to him, we learn something new. And so we're really excited to be able to share some of his insights with us today. David, how are you doing?
I'm great, Gianluca. I'm really excited to be part of this. Thanks so much for the invitation and the chance to come play with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it'd be really great just to kind of start us off. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to, the industry and how you came to Lingotek? I mean, how long have you been there now?
I have been with Lingotek just over 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been an interesting experience. It's everything that I hoped for and more. I've been sort of dancing around language issues my whole life, and didn't know it until I got to the point where I was trying to figure out what to do next, and realized that all this experience and exposure that I had in hospitality and restaurant, and then in software engineering, and my career at Microsoft got me into some really interesting spaces. Started to go down that road and talk to the folks at Lingotek probably 5 years ago, and wound up going to some other position, and then came back a couple of years ago because it was just such a incredible opportunity to be in this industry and really try and make a difference. I was starting to tell the story of I was getting stealth interviewed a while ago. It became known I was going to make a change, and people were like, "Oh, what are you gonna do next?" And I said, I'm interviewing with a couple places, and I'm talking to these folks in language services industry, and this person who is a vice president of sales and marketing for an international company, who is, by the way, not an American. This makes the story even more interesting. Says to me, "Well, I've got 2 words for you: Google Translate. You don't need a language services industry. Everything is going." And then he said, the clincher, "If I learned English, everybody else can." So I was just like, ooh, that was, it is kind of like, all right, I'm definitely going into language services technology and language services now. Thank you very much for being the person to ignite that fuse. So that's kind of how I got here. A few other stops along the way, but then it becomes a boring story, so we'll stop.
No, yeah, that's super interesting, and I want to touch on the Google Translate thing in a moment. But what exactly is your role at Straker Lingotek? What are you responsible for? Can you kind of give people an idea as to the day-to-day of a solutions engineer?
The core thing that we're responsible for as solutions engineers is making sure that our clients are well versed on the language technologies at play, particularly the Lingotek Translation Management System. That's the heart of what we do here. So we give enterprises a lot of flexibility, a lot of control, and a lot of insight into their localization process. Some places are really just starting their journey and they need something really straightforward. But then you have people who have been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. They know what they want, they know how they need it, and they know how they need to make it happen. So we solve a lot of the productivity challenges around managing the translation process in our TMS, and then bring related technologies to bear. So as part of that, as you can imagine, we're tied into our clients directly. We're tied into sales and marketing processes. We're tied deeply into product development and providing feedback. And of course, working with our fantastic client success team to really understand what's happening and where we need to provide more assistance to our clients. So that's the short version.
Yeah, super interesting. So you touched upon kind of Google Translate earlier,
Yeah.
and you touched upon how the TMS, ties into different technologies, and how every client has different kind of challenges, and there's different ways of solving them, with technology. So that's a long-winded way of me getting to this question of, can you tell us a little bit about, machine translation? And we can talk about, Google is kind of the elephant in the room. That's the one
Sure.
that people know. Um, but what's kind of, your experience with machine translation, and what different applications can it be used for now? Like, what are you seeing clients either talking about where they're saying, hey, maybe I'm going to use machine translation for this? But then
Mhm.
also, how are we on our end internally, maybe, or clients internally using machine translations as well? Give people, I guess, kind of the big picture summary if you can.
So the big picture with machine translation is that it's not magic. It doesn't solve all our problems, but it's a fantastic tool to solve certain kinds of problems. It really is. I look at translation really because part of my background as a productivity problem. And one of those problems is there's so much to translate. We don't have enough multilingual talent, time, or budget to go and translate everything inside of a single organization, much less across the entire landscape. So there's got to be some way to serve multilingual needs a little more efficiently, a little more economically, and that's really the core of the problem that machine translation is trying to solve. So when we start looking at machine translation adoption, really the most mature aspects of that are we have certain kinds of content that it's okay for it to be machine translated. And we can kind of talk about what's okay to machine translate versus what's really not okay to machine translate. Um, but then we get to have this content stratification discussion and go, okay, you've got things that are really, really super important that if there's a mistake made, maybe people go to jail, right? The forward-looking statements, health information, certain things that, wow, it's gotta be perfect, not just in the words that are coming out of the translation, but the tone, the emotional impact. Those are things that there has to be a human in the loop somewhere. But to get started or to handle content that's less impactful, a little more boring, you just got to get through it. Yeah, machine translation can be really, really handy. And also, it's great for stuff that you didn't write. You don't have that emotional investment, so yeah, let me just kind of get the gist of it. Let me run it through a machine translation engine, get the gist. Maybe it'll be good enough. Good enough is a phrase that you hear over and over again when we're talking about machine translation. So it usually starts out there. It's like, is it that can really survive machine translation and come out the other side of it being okay, being good enough for our purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. And then if we're gonna kind of peel back the onion one more layer, what different types of machine translation are there? I think a lot of people, you know, to again take it back to that person who talked to you and goes, well, there's going to be Google, and you're
Yeah.
going to be out, and we're all going to be out of a job. But I don't see that happening anytime soon personally. So kind of maybe give people who have a little less experience some insight into the different types of models there are, and what kind of maybe some of the advantages, disadvantages, or how the technology is progressing today.
There's a lot of progress, and it really is getting to the point where it's not a question of will we use it, it's where and when we use it. um, Science fiction didn't do us any favors in this space. C3PO is kind of the first thing a lot of people talk about, the Star Trek universal communicator. It's just magic, right? It just pops in and can understand everything perfectly, but it doesn't. The evolution of machine translation since the old IBM experiments in the 50s, all right, it's pretty staggering what's happened. And it's gone from these models where it's just pure statistical matching. We have parallel phrases. We've got this in English, we've got this in Spanish. If we ever see this pairing again, we know we can use it, right? And word by word. And then evolved into, oh, if we see this phrase over again, we can use that. And now we're advancing into neural machine translation. and it's a little more advanced where it's not just phrase based, but it's taking into account the entire stream of what's been translated so far. So we have some interesting opportunities with more languages than we ever have before to get them translated quickly and cost efficiently using machine translation. Um, we get to have a lot of fun conversations about, is it artificial intelligence? Is it not? Is my chatbot a real boy? Those kind of things. It's a little, not really. I mean, this is still a clear path to the evolution of the statistical things that have been worked on for decades. It's just a lot better, a lot more efficient, and we can really come to terms with, yeah, this is good enough. This is a good enough thing to plug in and start to service some of the markets that maybe we haven't previously.
Yeah. So you keep, using the phrase good enough. Can you expand upon what are some of the kind of typical applications you see machine translation being used, both, within our client base, but also within just the conversations you have with people maybe who contemplate using Lingotech or using MT, and we're in
Mm-hmm.
those rooms and having those conversations, but don't end up maybe going with us. Um, where is it in a business world really applicable?
Yeah.
And how do different clients kind of actually, capitalize on that? What are I can't imagine they have somebody copy and pasting into Google every day. So what's happening
Right.
in the back end?
Right. So first off, what works in machine translation? It's the boring stuff. I mean, that's really where you start looking at the separation. Product documentation. That is like number one. It's language that is clear, it's concise, it's unambiguous. Come to terms with the fact that human language is a difficult tool for conveying idea to begin with. Now we're asking software to take something that someone's written and turn it into something that's meaningful for someone else. It's a big ask. So the less complicated the source text, honestly, the less sophisticated, the more boring, like I said, it's going to do better in machine translation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at quality, and we have to come back to quality and kind of talk about how do you really measure quality. But if you have that measure of quality, you can say, yeah, it's going to do reasonably well here in this fairly boring space. It's going to do less well in the exciting, emotional content that you get from, say, marketing campaigns or commercials, entertainment. Those sorts of things are much more difficult for machine translation to handle because of the natural ambiguities in human language. There's a million different ways to interpret what someone says. If you have a simple sentence like the red paint can, right? This is one of my favorite examples back when I used to haunt the people at Microsoft Research about this. Like, we got the red paint can. Okay, well, what does that really mean? Is it the can that's designed to hold paint and the can is red? Or is it, the can of red paint? Or is it the red paint in that can is able to do whatever we're talking about? Right? So just that simple example, we can spin off into 3, 4, 5 different paths, and it's crazy ridiculous. And not to mention, different languages start dealing with, case agreement and numeric agreement and gender agreement, and it becomes interesting. So the more simple you can keep the language, the better off you're going to be when you ask a machine to go and translate it for you. Okay?
Yeah.
That said, we can have humans kind of watching it. Again, it's about volume, it's about productivity. So if we say, okay, go ahead and run this in machine translation, but there's going to be someone who actually speaks the language, is going to edit it. We talk about post-edited machine translation quite a lot. Then it will be, a little more acceptable, right? We're not going to ask them to retranslate it, but let's just make sure we haven't done anything offensive or egregious. Keep us from being a meme on Reddit tomorrow, would you? That's the ask a lot of times for the post editors to come in and do that. So, and that also ties into quality. Is that Is that worth the effort, or should we have just translated to begin with? And sometimes it's hard to tell until you go in and start trying, until you start testing and you get that feedback of, was this a good quality translation out of machine translation? Or, my gosh, should we have just gone with a human translator to begin with? Sometimes that is impacted by the domain. There are certain business domains that, without being offensive, they're not that complicated. They're very well understood. They're very well known. And a machine translation engine can go, yeah, okay, we kind of understand this space, and we can do a fairly good job in this domain with this pair of languages. Another vector that we have to consider is, going from English to Spanish. Honestly, it's a lot easier for a lot of reasons than going from English to Japanese. Okay, lots of reasons. That's not because Japanese is inherently more difficult a language, a human language, or inferior in some way. It's just, man, it's different. Written Japanese, colloquial Japanese, those things have, very different things. And there's resources that have been used to train these engines that are more prevalent in a language like Spanish or French than there might be in Japanese or Swahili or something else that we're starting to see emerge in the machine translation space.
Yeah.
So getting in there and getting those quality questions is really, really tough. But also, the second part of your question was, how does it happen? How does it actually get in there? You're not going to cut and paste into a text box on a website. That's murder. Plus, that's not anybody's best machine translation technology. It's not Google's best. It's not Microsoft's best. It's no one's best. Okay? There's going to be API-driven interactions that allow you to get to the really good stuff from a machine translation perspective. And that's either a better tuned default engine that has privacy controls and security and some custom training models and things like that, that can do things fragments at a time, documents at a time, and that will vary across the different machine translation engine providers too. So there's a lot of homework that we have to help with to start to say, all right, I have these languages in my portfolio and I'm going from English to XYZ. Is Microsoft the right bet? Is Google the right bet? Is DeepL the right one? Is Asia Online the right one? These are all the things that have to go into the conversation, and it opens people's eyes when start rattling this off to go, oh wait, I can't just run all 14 of my languages through Google and be done. Maybe I'm not going to knock Google. They're doing great work over there, but depending on which 14 languages, depending on what business domain you're in, depending on whether you have assets to go in and customize and train the engine to be better targeted to your specific domain, maybe not. We have to have that conversation. We need to have an evaluation process and come back and talk about, it did well. Human reviewers took a look at it, and this one was great. This one was this one was terrible. How do you want to proceed with that?
Yeah. So then if we're looking at evaluating, whether it's the output of a different engine or whether you should use, just pure machine translation, we're talking a lot about, domains and things like that. And there's kind of maybe some general statements that we can kind of follow and some general rules. But then if we actually start to get in there and start doing the work, testing it out, when language can be so subjective, how are we evaluating that? How much of it can be objectively quantified? How much of it is subjective and is kind of just down to the individual who's making these decisions in the background going, I like that, I don't like that. What are the different tools that people might have, access to, either when they're talking to us or when they're evaluating things on their own?
Subjective is really hard. It really is. Whenever you start asking for an opinion, was this a good whatever? Was this a good car? No, that was a horrible. Those Maseratis are terrible, right? No, I mean, was this good? Was this bad? So we start to look at a broader set of translations. We don't want to hinge it off of just one opinion. And how do we coalesce that into something that's a little more middle of the road, a little less opinionated. So we track in our platform the editing that happens to a translation, whether it's a machine translation that's being post-edited by a professional, or a professional translation that has then been checked and post-edited by someone else, because we do that to humans too, right? And we can get scoring off of that. We can understand how much effort went into editing a piece of content, and overall we can start to see these edit scores. So a lot of work had to go into editing this content when it came back from translation. As a matter of fact, it cost you more to do the post edit than it would have cost you if you had just used a professional to begin with. Okay, you're not going to know that after one document. You're going to see that after weeks of sending content through and getting those edit scores and seeing your trends. And it's about evaluating the trends. Okay? Maybe you start to see that trends are improving because you got these initial batches of edits and you use them to train the engine. Or you got these edits back and you stored them in translation memory and reused them the next time you submitted content, so things weren't being retranslated. Right? That's a big part of translation management as well, reusing what you've already translated and what you've already paid for. So you can see those trends over time and start to say, yeah, we made a good choice. We were good here. Or we start to see some degradation over time, and you can ask those questions. Why is that? Are we introducing more sophisticated content? Do we have someone else doing the evaluation who's a little more subjective and a little more strict? So it really leads to several more questions than just a, hey, if your edit score is at this level, you're bad. If it's at this level, you're good. It's about that trend and which way is it going. There are other metrics that are in the industry. We hear about blue scores a lot, and being able to evaluate a specific machine translation engine. It's the same category. It's an interesting statistic that's going to give you some potentially objective measure to say, yes, this is doing well against a benchmark. Watch the trends over time. Are you doing well in this space or not? So it really becomes a strategy of, just like you watch, in a business scenario, you're watching your sales opportunity pipeline go up, down, sideways, backwards, whatever it is. Same thing with your language quality. That will apply to human translation, right, as equally as machine translation. We should point that out. But definitely in the machine translation space, you're going to see faster evolution because new technologies, new models, new approaches are being introduced by the major MT engine vendors on a weekly basis almost. We've seen Amazon go from 0 to really darn good in a very short period of time, relatively speaking. So that's always going to be something that requires constant vigilance. How is that quality doing? Here's some metrics that our system can provide that can help you make a decision of, are you on a good path?
Yeah. How do you stay up to date, right? I mean, it's a little bit like anytime we look at technology, you think back even just a few months ago, what was possible versus a few years ago versus 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What would your kind of best practice be for somebody who's like, hey, I really have a strong need and I have a great use case for machine translation, but how do they kind of track the advancements in the industry and then even be able to implement them, right? I mean, if you're talking about connecting into an API, that's somebody who has to do that legwork, right? As much as a lot of people like to talk about, hey, plug and play, really easy. In reality, we know that often a lot of customization needs to happen in the background. A lot of development might need to happen, and it's not always as black and white as maybe a salesperson would love the client and would love people to believe.
Oh, is this a segment where we get to start talking bad about the salespeople? No. I love you guys. I love you. Keep us in business. I love you. No, I will. Actually, I will take the opportunity. Not that he's watching, but my capstone MIS professor back in 1996, Craig Van Slyke, I asked him the same question. I'm MIS. Major. How do I keep on top of everything that's happening in the field? He looked at me, didn't blink, and said, "You don't. You don't. You have people around you. You have things that are important to you right now, and you do everything you possibly can to stay on top of those important issues. But there are going to be other important issues that you need to depend on expert advice to be able to make decisions and go forward. And that's where we are with machine translation and all the things that you just listed. Yes, machine translation. I can go and I can learn everything that I can about the current state of the art about machine translation and say, yes, for my language pairs, for the business that I'm in, I'm going to pick these 3 engines and I want to train them and I want to do these things with them and I want to make it happen. Great. Now, how do I get my content in there? How do I assign my reviewers? How do I monitor billing? How do I stay on top of training and updates and translation memory and those kind of things? And that's where you have to have the team who understands content management system integration, how to really get the most out of the APIs that are being exposed by the MT engine vendors. And that's what our team at Lingotek does. So we have people who understand CMS integration. We have people who understand task management and workflow from a content management and translation management perspective, and we're building those tools. And we have people who understand language tech upside down, backwards, and forwards, who are going to be able to take whatever is streaming our way and give it to translators, whether they're professional human translators or machine translation engines, and get the results back to you in the format that you expect. So it's about asking the priority question. What matters to you? And when we're talking about machine translation technology, we've got to talk about the experience that you're trying to provide for a target audience, because that might differ from audience to audience. Okay? Right. I've got a major press release talking about our Q4 earnings. It's forward-looking statements. My CFO can land in jail if things are not properly stated. Yes, we're going to have professional translators and professional reviewers and professional other people involved in making sure this is spot on, perfect quality. I've got help content for a underserved market where we just learned we're doing major business and nobody told us. So all of a sudden we have to translate our stuff into language X. Okay, machine translation, here we come. Giddy up and make it happen. So talking about the business priorities, like with most things, has got to be the heart of the conversation. Understand that, and then we can help with guiding towards a safe and sane strategy that says, yeah, you do it this way, or you got other options. But if you want it done quickly, on budget, high quality, the old iron triangle, let's help you manipulate that in a way that makes sense for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned translation memory, and you mentioned it earlier, so I want to kind of come back to that, right? When we're talking about developing machine translation engines and kind of training them, right, whether we're talking about custom, NMT or all the different things we're seeing nowadays, how important is translation memory? What role is it playing? And then even maybe give us a breakdown for some of the people who have less experience. What is translation memory, right? And how is it used, both from an MT standpoint and just in a general localization?
I think translation memory is important however translation happens, because what the translation memory does is capture the translations that have been previously approved. So you've gone through, you have them translated, you probably paid for it, you probably had someone look at it, that cost something. So let's hang on to it, let's capture it. And the next time we have something for translation, let's see how much of it we can reuse. Let's take this and go, all right, it's a document update. We've changed a paragraph. Do I need to pay to have the other 12 paragraphs translated? Well, no. That's where translation memory comes in. Let's grab those pre-existing translations first, and then the new stuff will get sent out for translation, whether that's to human or machine. Don't care at this point. Okay? We're going to reuse what we've already paid for. That's just smart business. From a machine translation perspective, we can use that translation memory in training. Now, not every machine translation engine is created equally in this regard, but Amazon, Microsoft, pretty sure Google, the big ones, they're going to be able to take training content in the form of parallel text. Well, that's what a translation memory is. It's parallel text, and we can help customize and train the engines on that set of material that's already been approved. So you should see, theoretically, if machine translation engines are advancing at the rate that we expect them to, see better translation results. And the same thing with human translation. People are going to be able to look back and say, oh, well, this has been translated this way previously. Let's stay in line with that. Whether it's the semantics, the words that are used, the tone, the emotional content, great, we can look at that and reuse it. So whatever's being translated, having a translation memory built up over time is going to benefit your budget, your turnaround times, and the quality of the translation that you get back.
Yeah. I want to start to wrap things up here. I want to throw a little curveball at you as we wrap up the podcast here. The amount of texts that we have, the massive corpus of text that we have historically is already, like you said, too much to ever translate, right?
Yeah.
Even just in English, let alone in, the 190 plus languages we have in this world, right? What is happening now with the onset of so much more content that's being created audio, in an audio format, right? Whether it's videos, podcasts. I know when I talk to our clients, so many of them are pivoting from, hey, this PDF that tells people, how to do their job, to click through this, e-learning course.
Right.
What is the translation industry? What are we going to have to be aware of? What kind of advancements are already happening and are necessary as more and more content is being produced in an audio format, not in a written format?
This is a really great question. And I think I know where you got this question. Maybe we actually are doing a lot of video and audio for customers, not just Lingotech, but across the Straker group. There are teams that are focused on professional voiceover, transcription, captioning. So it's there's a lot there, and you're absolutely right. I had this comment made by someone the other day that people aren't clicking on the documents; they're clicking on the video and going through the video. So we have to have that. You think about that in terms of translation. What's video? How do you translate that? A couple of different ways. Number one is captions and being able to provide them in local language, but also potentially, if it's high value, it's voiceover work, right? You see this in movies. We're starting to see that push down into business. Commercials are being done in multiple languages. Messaging of all sorts is being done in video in multiple languages and getting voiceover talent in there. So first off, it's being able to really do a good job of handling transcription. We see good results from automated transcription across the industry. Gosh, I want to name names here, but I probably shouldn't at this point because I don't have the sign off.
No free sponsors.
Yeah, no free sponsors here. No. But also from a technical perspective, understanding that captioning, that the issues there in captioning and the way that it segments is different than the way written text segments. So it may be the exact same words that have to be translated. You've got a PDF document, you've got a video over here. Well, video has moving images behind it that have to be lined up very carefully to the words that are going to be presented on the captioning. That's hard enough to do in the source language. In the target languages, there's all sorts of very difficult decisions that people have to make about how to truncate, what information to potentially leave out without impacting the appreciation of what's happening visually. You go back to, what was it, last year and a half ago, Squid Games on Netflix. Not to bag on anybody, those guys got a rough deal. There were a lot of difficult things that had to be decided on in doing the captioning and translations for that. So being able to align captions as well as as do as good a job aligning those as we do with plain text is something that still needs to be worked on. And I think there's a really great opportunity to come in and do things from a productivity workbench perspective to help with adjusting alignments on the fly, being able to get collaborative feedback on, hey, we've got a decision to make here. It can go one way or the other, and if it goes this way, you lose X. If it goes this way, you lose Y. What's more important to the story being told? So those kind of things are still to be really truly worked out in detail, but it's happening. The asks are happening, so that means we're going to solve it in short order if we want to keep our clients happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to finish off. My last question to you is a very, future forward, kind of future facing question. I like to always use the example that, um, you know, 30 years ago, even 50 years ago, if you had told somebody we would have autonomous, driving vehicles, that would not, nobody would believe you. Where do you see machine translation in the future? And I'm not going to put you in any kind of timeline here. I'll let you interpret it as you will. Are we going to see, machine translations really become ubiquitous, or what's your impression and thoughts on that matter?
I think machine translation is probably going to be in people's everyday toolkit as an indispensable aid. I really do. I mean, you see it today. Just if you're traveling internationally, people are pulling out their phones and sending images to be translated on the fly, just so they don't get lost, or make sure they understand what it is that's been brought to their table at dinner. Those kind of situations, and I think that's just going to be second nature across the board. What I don't see happening is a complete takeover of machine translation and the need for professionals to completely go away. I think we're going to reprioritize where professionals spend their time, and there will be more things that happen and be given to machine translation. I think you have to understand the machine translation is, in my thinking, another form of confirmation bias. Right? Everything is about what's happened before, and innovation in language isn't going to stop because machine translation got good. People are going to continue to say things a different way, to use words in different contexts. Pull out a dictionary, look at words that entered the lexicon in the last 100 years. A lot of them don't mean what they did in 1907, right? But we use them every day, and we have to understand them and make sense of them. So again, things that are boring, things that are routine, machine translation is going to be great for them. But things that are going to be emotionally impactful, things that really are going to be targeted to influencing someone, either to go down this path, eat at this restaurant, say hello to this person, that's always going to have some sort of humanity in the loop in order for that to be understood in the way it's intended. So yeah, we're going to see a lot more machine translation. We're past the religious fights of it'll never happen. It's happening. It's real. It's every day. Get over it. Use it well. Use it smartly. But use it in its place. And I think that's just going to continue. It will get better and better and better, so that we can have meaningful conversation around certain things. But it will always have its limits, as long as humans are still at least somewhat creative in the way that they use language.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. All right. Well, thank you, David. This has been a really great conversation. I want to remind everybody that you can find this on Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get any, of your podcasts. It's also on YouTube. So thanks again, David. It's been an awesome conversation. And if you want to continue this conversation with us, please feel free to reach out. It is literally our job to talk to you about this stuff. So,
Yes, it is.
don't hesitate at all. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Gianluca.